The moment Eleanor Morrison stepped off that stagecoach in August 1883, she knew the advertisement had been a beautiful lie. But what waited for her at Silver Creek Ranch wasn't just a foreman's betrayal. It was a secret that could destroy them all, a wounded man carrying guilt from a war that never ended, and a love built not on rescue, but on respect earned in blood and dust. Stay until the end to see how one woman's refusal to be owned ignited a revolution in justice, love, and the courage to stand for what's right. Hit that like button and comment what state you're watching from. I want to see how far Eleanor's story travels. And don't forget to subscribe for more untold tales of the American West. I know your secret. When Eastern Lady found Apache family, hidden a ranch love story began. The Wyoming heat hit Eleanor Morrison like a physical blow the moment she descended from the stagecoach. August 1883 had turned the high plains into a furnace, and the dust that rose from the coach wheels seemed to hang suspended in air too thick to breathe properly. She stood with her single worn trunk at her feet, watching the coach disappear into a shimmer of sage and distance, and felt the weight of her decision settle over her like a shroud. 24 years old, motherless, fatherless, and with exactly 17 cents in her reticule. The advertisement had promised a position as household manager for a respectable Wyoming ranch. Decent wages, room and board, and the kind of fresh start that didn't exist anymore in Philadelphia, where everyone knew her father had died with a morphine needle in his arm. Except that wasn't the whole truth, and Eleanor carried that particular lie like a stone in her chest. The man studying her from beneath a sweat-stained hat wasn't what she'd expected either. He was thick-necked and broad-shouldered, with the kind of casual cruelty that came from years of unchecked authority. His shirt hung open at the throat, revealing skin burned dark by the Wyoming sun, and his boots were caked with something Eleanor refused to identify. "You're smaller than I expected," he said, circling her like she was livestock at auction. "And older." Eleanor kept her spine straight. The advertisement specified someone of working age and sound character. "I meet both requirements." The man laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling downhill. "Sound character. That's rich." He spat into the dirt near her trunk. "Name's Garrett Hayes. I'm foreman here at Silver Creek." "You'll answer to me." "I was under the impression I would answer to Mrs. Steele," Eleanor said carefully. "Mrs. Steele's been dead 5 years. Garrett cut her off with brutal efficiency. "The old man don't involve himself in hiring. That's my domain now." His smile revealed tobacco-stained teeth. "And what I need ain't some prissy miss arranging flowers. I need bodies for the harvest. Haying season's upon us, and we're short-handed." The bottom dropped out of Eleanor's stomach. She'd known the advertisement was vague. All the good positions had been claimed months ago, but she'd told herself that household support meant cooking, cleaning, perhaps managing accounts. Respectable work. Safe work. Not this. "I don't have experience with field labor," she said, hating how thin her voice sounded. "You'll learn fast enough." Garrett jerked his chin toward a long, low building beyond the main house. "Bunkhouse is that way. You'll share with the other hands. Breakfast at 4:30, work starts at 5. You miss a shift, you lose a day's pay. You cause trouble, you're on the next stage east if you can afford the ticket." The threat landed exactly as he intended. Eleanor had 17 cents and no family to wire for help. Her father had drunk himself into an early grave, leaving debts and shame in equal measure. Her mother had followed 6 months later, from what the doctors called exhaustion, but Eleanor knew was simply surrender to a world that had broken her. Philadelphia had kept Eleanor on as long as it could, boarding house charity, then working in a factory until her fingers bled. But eventually, even sympathy had limits. Wyoming was supposed to be her fresh start, her escape from pitying looks and marriage proposals from men who saw a desperate woman and smelled opportunity. Instead, she traded one trap for another. "The advertisement promised," she started. "The advertisement promised whatever it needed to promise to get warm bodies out here." Garrett stepped closer, close enough that she could smell whiskey and sweat. "You got a problem with honest work, Miss Morrison, because there's the road. No one's forcing you to stay." Eleanor looked at the road. It stretched empty and endless, disappearing into heat shimmer and sagebrush. The next town was 15 miles north. She had no horse, no water, and no illusions about her chances of survival in this brutal landscape. She looked back at Garrett and saw exactly what he expected: submission, defeat. Something sharp and cold settled in her chest. She'd spent her entire life being pushed into corners by men who assumed her desperation made her pliable. Her father had assumed it. The landlord who'd suggested she could work off her rent had assumed it. Every man who'd ever looked at her circumstances and seen weakness had assumed it. She was done rewarding their assumptions. "I'll need to see the living quarters first," she said, her voice level, "and the terms of employment in writing, including pay rate, hours, and specific duties." Garrett blinked. For just a moment, surprise cracked through his confidence. Then his face darkened. "You'll see what I tell you to see, and you'll do what I tell you to do. That's the only terms you need to know." "Then we have a problem," Eleanor said, "because I don't work under conditions I haven't reviewed." "You don't got a choice, girl." "Everyone has choices, Mr. Hayes. I can choose to report this situation to the territorial authorities. I can choose to inform every newspaper between here and Denver that Silver Creek Ranch lures women west under false pretenses. I can make those choices even if they inconvenience me considerably." It was a bluff. She had no money for lawyers, no connections to newspapers. But her voice didn't waver and her eyes didn't drop. Garrett's hand moved to his belt, not to the buckle, to something beside it. Eleanor's breath caught. She'd pushed too hard, miscalculated. "Is there a problem, Garrett?" The new voice cut across the tension like cold water. Eleanor turned to see a man approaching from the direction of the main house. He was younger than Garrett, perhaps 32, with dark hair and the kind of lean, rangy build that came from real work rather than supervisory bluster. He moved with quiet purpose, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of a well-maintained hat. But it was something else that caught Eleanor's attention. Something in the set of his shoulders, the way his gaze swept the area with practiced vigilance. This was a man who'd seen violence and expected to see it again. "No problem, Mr. Steele," Garrett said, his tone shifting immediately. "Just getting the new girl settled." "She has a name." The younger man's gaze moved to Eleanor. "You must be Miss Morrison. I'm Jackson Steele. My father owns Silver Creek." Eleanor managed a nod, her heart still hammering. "Mr. Steele." "You look unsettled," Jackson observed. His phrasing was careful, deliberate, not accusatory, but creating space for her to speak. "Has something happened?" Eleanor recognized the tactic. She'd navigated enough social landmines in Philadelphia to understand the art of diplomatic inquiry. He was giving her room to respond without directly challenging his foreman. "I was clarifying the terms of my employment," she said. "There seems to be some discrepancy between the advertisement and Mr. Hayes's description of my duties." Jackson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture. "What did the advertisement promise?" "Household management, respectable work." "And what did Garrett offer?" Eleanor glanced at the foreman. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes promising retribution for this conversation. But Jackson Steele was waiting, and Eleanor had already committed to the truth. "Field labor, shared bunkhouse, no written terms." Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Garrett. "Who authorized you to alter the hiring terms?" "We need bodies for haying." "Who authorized it?" The question came soft, but there was steel underneath. "No one authorized it. I made a practical decision. You were in town, the stage was coming, I handled it. By lying to a woman who traveled 2,000 miles on our promise." Jackson's voice remained level, but Eleanor heard the edge now. "That's not handling. That's fraud." "Now wait just a minute. Miss Morrison." Jackson turned his full attention to her, and Eleanor found herself meeting eyes that were neither kind nor cruel, just direct. "I apologize for this situation. It's unacceptable. Would you come with me to the house? I'd like to offer you something." Garrett should have provided immediately actual choices. The word landed strange in her ears. Choices? When had anyone offered her those? "I don't understand," she said carefully. "You came west looking for work. Silver Creek has work. But I won't trap you into something you didn't agree to, and I won't house you in conditions that weren't part of our original agreement." He picked up her trunk with easy strength. "Come, let's discuss what's actually available and what you're actually willing to do." Eleanor looked at Garrett. The foreman's face had gone stony, but underneath she could see rage building like a thunderhead. She'd made an enemy, that much was clear. But she'd also found something unexpected. A man willing to acknowledge that fraud was fraud, even when it came wrapped in practical decisions. She followed Jackson Steele toward the house. The main building at Silver Creek was sprawling and practical, rather than elegant, built from local timber and riverstone. Jackson led her through a side entrance into a mudroom, where boots stood in neat rows and jackets hung from wooden pegs. The temperature dropped 10 degrees in the shade, and Eleanor felt some of the tension leak from her shoulders. "Wait here," Jackson said, setting down her trunk. "I'll get my aunt." He disappeared through an interior door, leaving Eleanor alone with her racing thoughts. Through the window, she could see Garrett stalking toward the bunkhouse, his posture radiating fury. She'd humiliated him in front of his employer. That wasn't the kind of thing men like Garrett forgot. But then she heard it so faint she almost missed it. A sound that didn't belong in a Wyoming ranch house. A child's voice speaking in a language Eleanor hadn't heard in years. Apache. The distinctive cadence was unmistakable. Her father had been a military surgeon in the Arizona Territory before the morphine claimed him. Eleanor had grown up on the edges of army posts, had played with Apache children whose families worked as scouts. She'd learned enough of the language to trade stories and understand basic conversation. And she'd just heard someone, a child by the pitch, say something about being hungry and scared. The sound came from the direction of the stables. Eleanor's mind raced. Why would there be Apache speakers soon? The wars were supposed to be over. Most of the tribes had been moved to reservations. Unless the door opened, Jackson returned with an older woman who radiated competent authority. She was perhaps 55, with dark hair showing gray at the temples and eyes that assessed Eleanor with the shrewdness of someone who'd seen every variety of human nature. "Miss Morrison," the woman said, extending a hand. "I'm Rosa Martinez. I'm Jackson's aunt, and the closest thing this ranch has to household management since his mother passed." Eleanor shook her hand, noting the firm grip and the calluses that spoke of real work. "Mrs. Martinez." "Miss, actually. Never saw the point of marriage when I had a ranch to help run." Rosa gestured to a bench. "Sit. Jackson says Garrett tried to pull a fast one on you." There was no delicate dancing around the subject. Eleanor found it refreshing. She sat. "He told me I'd be working the fields." "He's short-handed and desperate," Rosa said bluntly. "But that don't excuse lying. The advertisement went out under my name. I promised household work, and I meant it." She paused. "Though I should be honest with you, household work here ain't what you'd find in a Philadelphia drawing room." "I didn't expect drawing rooms," Eleanor said. "I expected honest work for honest pay." Rosa smiled. "Good. Then let me tell you what's actually available." She counted off on her fingers. "First, I need help managing this house. Cooking for the main family and any hands who eat at the big table. Cleaning laundry, mending basic household tasks, but for a large operation. Second, I need help with the books. Jackson's excellent with horses and men, but he hates paperwork. The ranch accounts are a mess, and I can't wrangle them alone. Third, we've got a vegetable garden that feeds 20 people. It needs constant tending." She paused. "And field work if you want it. We pay the same no matter what you choose, $2 a week plus room and board. But I won't force you into work you didn't sign up for." Eleanor's mind had caught on one detail. "The books. You good with numbers?" "I kept the accounts for my father's practice before he died. I can write cipher. I'm adequate at cooking and cleaning. I'm terrible at anything requiring significant physical strength." Rosa's smile widened. "Can you organize chaos?" "I've managed entire households on budgets that should have been impossible." "Then I've got a job for you if you want it. Help me get this place running like a proper operation instead of a bachelor chaos zone. Manage the books, keep the household accounts, make sure we're not hemorrhaging money on stupid purchasing decisions." She glanced at Jackson. "No offense." "None taken," Jackson said dryly. "She's right. I bought 6 saddles last month because the merchant said it was a deal." "Did you need 6 saddles?" Eleanor asked. "No." "Then it wasn't a deal." Rosa laughed outright. "Oh, I like her. Can we keep her?" Jackson's expression remained serious. "Miss Morrison needs to understand the full situation before she decides. This isn't an easy place. We're 15 miles from town. We work dawn to dusk most days, and winters are brutal. The men here are rough. Most of them are decent, but some have attitudes about women that aren't what you'd call enlightened." "Like Garrett," Eleanor said. "Like Garrett," Jackson agreed. "If you stay, you'll have conflicts with him, especially after today. He doesn't like his authority challenged." I've noticed. I'm telling you this because I won't lie about what you're walking into. If you choose to stay, I'll back you on reasonable decisions and I'll make sure you're treated with respect. But I can't guarantee it'll be pleasant. Eleanor studied him. He stood with his hat in his hands, meeting her eyes directly. There was no charm in his delivery, no attempt to sweeten the truth, just facts laid out clean. It was the most respect anyone had shown her in years. "May I see where I'd be staying?" she asked. Rosa stood. "Of course. Come on." The room was on the second floor of the main house, small but private. A narrow bed with a simple quilt, a washstand, a chest of drawers, and a window that looked out over the mountains. After 6 months of sharing a boarding house room with 3 other women, after years of making do with corners and hand-me-downs, it felt like luxury. "It's not fancy," Rosa said, "but it's yours. Door has a lock." Eleanor ran her hand over the quilt, wedding ring pattern carefully pieced. "It's perfect. You ain't seen the work yet. I've seen the alternative." Eleanor turned to face the older woman. "Mr. Hayes made it clear what my other option was. Shared bunkhouse with men who'd view me as either property or entertainment. Field work I'm not qualified for. No privacy, no safety, no dignity." She paused. "This room has a lock. That alone is worth more than you're offering to pay me." Rosa's expression softened. "You've had a hard road, haven't you?" "Haven't we all? Fair enough." Rosa moved to the door. "Get settled. Supper's at 6. I'll introduce you to the old man, then Jackson's father. Well, you'll see. He ain't warm, but he's fair when you prove yourself." After Rosa left, Eleanor sat on the bed and let herself shake. She'd done it. Somehow, impossibly, she'd stood her ground against a bully and ended up with exactly what she'd hoped for: honest work, fair pay, and a locked door between her and the world. But as the adrenaline faded, reality settled in. She'd made an enemy of the foreman on her first day. She'd committed to work she hadn't fully seen. And she was completely alone in a landscape that cared nothing for Eastern sensibilities or female vulnerability. And then there was that voice she'd heard, the Apache child. What was Silver Creek hiding? Eleanor stood, smoothed her dress, and began unpacking her trunk. She had 3 hours until supper. That was enough time to wash the dust from her face, pin her hair properly, and prepare to meet the man who owned this sprawling, complicated empire. She'd survive Philadelphia. She'd survive the journey west. She'd survive Garrett. She could survive a rancher's scrutiny, probably. But as she arranged her few belongings in the chest of drawers, her mind kept returning to that small voice speaking Apache, to Jackson's careful vigilance, to Rosa's knowing eyes. Silver Creek Ranch had secrets, and Eleanor Morrison had always been dangerously good at finding them. So, supper was served in a dining room that was large without being grand. A long table of scarred wood chairs that didn't match walls, decorated with landscapes that had been painted by someone with more enthusiasm than skill. Rosa had set places for 4. Eleanor arrived exactly at 6, wearing her only good dress, dark blue wool, high-necked and practical. She'd pinned her hair until every strand was controlled, and she'd scrubbed her hands until they were as close to Philadelphia proper as Wyoming water could achieve. Jackson was already seated, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. He rose when she entered. "Miss Morrison." "Mr. Steele." The older man at the head of the table didn't stand. He was perhaps 68 with white hair and the kind of weathered face that spoke of decades under the Wyoming sun. His eyes were dark brown like Jackson's, but where his son's held directness, his held cold assessment. "This is my father," Jackson said. "Thomas Steele." "Father, this is Miss Eleanor Morrison. She'll be helping Rosa with the household and accounts." Thomas's gaze traveled over Eleanor with the same evaluating intensity she'd seen in horse traders. "You're the one who had words with Garrett." It wasn't a question. News traveled fast on a ranch. "Yes, sir." "Garrett says you've got an attitude problem." "Garrett has an honesty problem," Eleanor replied evenly. "I'd say we're even." The silence that followed was profound. Rosa, entering with a platter of beef and potatoes, froze mid-step. Jackson's expression went carefully neutral. Then Thomas laughed, a short, sharp bark of sound. "Well, you've got spine, I'll give you that." He gestured to the chair across from Jackson. "Sit. Let's see if you've got anything else." Eleanor sat, her heart hammering. She just mouthed off to the man who could throw her back onto the road without a second thought. But something about his tone, the grudging respect underneath the challenge, told her she'd made the right choice. Weakness wouldn't earn respect here. Only strength would. Rosa served the food, beef that had been cooked until it was tender potatoes with butter greens from the garden. Simple, hearty, perfect. They ate in silence for several minutes before Thomas spoke again. Rosa says you're good with numbers. Yes, sir. Prove it. Eleanor set down her fork. How? Ranch runs 5,000 head of cattle, 150 horses. We employ 23 men year-round, more during peak seasons. Last year, we sold 3,000 head at $18 per. What was our gross income from cattle sales? $54,000, Eleanor said immediately. Thomas's eyebrow rose. If we pay hands $30 a month plus board, what's our annual labor cost? Base salary for 23 men is $8,280. More during peak hiring, I'd need to see your seasonal employment patterns to calculate accurately. Feed costs for horses run $60 per head annually. How much are we spending on horse feed? $9,000. Assuming you're feeding the full herd, though, I'd question why you're calculating feed costs for working horses at the same rate as breeding stock or colts. The nutritional requirements are different. This time Thomas smiled, not warmly but with definite approval. She's right. We waste money feeding young stock like they're pulling loads. He looked at Jackson. Why haven't you caught that? Because I hate paperwork, Jackson said mildly. Well, now you've got someone who doesn't. Thomas turned back to Eleanor. You'll start reviewing the accounts tomorrow. I want a full report on inefficiencies within 2 weeks. It wasn't a request. Eleanor nodded. I'll need access to all financial records. Purchase orders, sales receipts, payroll documentation, feed bills, everything. Rosa will show you where we keep the books. Such as they are, Rosa muttered. Half of them are on scraps of paper shoved in drawers. Then I'll need time to organize before I can analyze, Eleanor said. Take whatever time you need, but I want results. Thomas returned his attention to his plate, then paused. And Miss Morrison, yes, sir. Garrett won't like you poking around in ranch business. I imagine not. He especially won't like a woman questioning his decisions. I'm not questioning his decisions. I'm reviewing the financial records. If those records reveal questionable decisions, that's not my fault. Thomas almost smiled again. Fair enough, but watch yourself. Garrett's been foreman here for 8 years. He's got loyalty from the men. Does he have loyalty from you? Eleanor asked. The question hung in the air. Jackson's eyes widened fractionally. Rosa stopped eating. Thomas studied Eleanor with new intensity. You're asking if I'll back you against my foreman. I'm asking if you value truth more than convenience. Depends on the truth. Then I'll make sure my findings are unimpeachable. Another silence, longer this time. Then Thomas nodded once sharp. See that you do. And Miss Morrison, sir, don't mistake directness for protection. You'll earn your place here, same as anyone else. I wouldn't expect anything less, sir. The rest of the meal passed with lighter conversation, Rosa asking about Eleanor's journey west, Jackson explaining the ranch layout, Thomas offering occasional gruff observations about the territory. But underneath the surface civility, Eleanor felt the weight of what she'd just committed to. She'd been hired to uncover inefficiencies, to question decisions, to challenge a foreman who already hated her. It was either incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. She'd find out which soon enough. That night, alone in her room with the door locked, Eleanor sat at the small desk and wrote a letter that she had no way to send. Dear Mother, I've arrived in Wyoming. The mountains are more beautiful and terrible than I imagined. The work will be harder than anything I've done before. But for the first time in years, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground. I miss you. I miss Philadelphia. But I don't miss who I was there, always afraid, always small, always apologizing for taking up space. Here, they expect me to take up space, to have opinions, to prove my worth. It's terrifying, but it's also exactly what I needed. Your daughter, Eleanor. She folded the letter and tucked it into her trunk. Someday, perhaps she'd visit her mother's grave and read it aloud. But for now, it was enough to have written the truth. Outside her window, the ranch settled into darkness. She could hear men's voices from the bunkhouse. The occasional whinny of horses, the endless whisper of wind through sage. Tomorrow she would start the real work. Tomorrow she would face Garrett again, this time armed with Thomas Steele's authorization to examine the books. Tomorrow she would begin proving that an Eastern woman with no ranch experience could hold her own against Wyoming's brutal standards. But tonight, in this small room with its locked door and simple quilt, she let herself feel something she hadn't felt in years: hope. And maybe, just maybe, the first fragile threads of belonging. The mountains stood guard outside her window, dark against the stars. Eleanor lay down, pulled the quilt to her chin, and slept better than she had in months. Whatever came next, she would face it standing up. Morning came early at Silver Creek Ranch. Eleanor woke to the sound of the breakfast bell at 4:30, just as Garrett had threatened. She dressed quickly in her plainest clothes, a simple brown skirt and white shirtwaist, and pinned her hair into a practical bun. The kitchen was already alive with activity when she entered. Rosa worked over a massive stove, frying eggs and bacon for what looked like an army. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, thick and strong enough to strip paint. "Coffee's on the table," Rosa said without turning. "Drink some, then start slicing that bread. We've got hungry men incoming." Eleanor poured herself coffee and picked up the bread knife. The loaves were fresh baked, still warm. She sliced methodically while Rosa worked, falling into an easy rhythm. The first men started arriving just as the sun cracked the eastern horizon. They came in groups of 2 and 3, stamping dust from their boots and bringing the smell of horses and leather with them. Most nodded politely to Rosa, glanced curiously at Eleanor, and found seats at the long table. Garrett arrived last. His expression was thunderous. He looked at Eleanor for a long moment, then deliberately sat with his back to her. "Trouble," Rosa murmured. "Always," Eleanor murmured back. They served breakfast, family-style platters of eggs and bacon bread and butter-strong coffee. The men ate with the focused intensity of people who burn calories like wood in a stove. Conversation was minimal, practical. Someone mentioned a broken fence line. Someone else talked about a horse throwing a shoe. Jackson entered halfway through the meal, nodded greetings around the table, and took the seat next to his father. He glanced at Eleanor, once his expression unreadable, then focused on his food. After breakfast, as the men filed out to their various tasks, Rosa gestured Eleanor toward a small office off the main hallway. "Records are in here, such as they are." Such as they are turned out to be an understatement. The office was chaos. Papers overflowed from drawers, were stacked on chairs, covered every surface. Some were neatly written ledger entries. Others were scrawled notes on the backs of envelopes. Still others were just numbers with no context. Eleanor stood in the doorway, surveying the disaster. "How long has it been like this?" "Since Jackson's mother died 3 years back. She kept everything organized. After she passed," Rosa shrugged. "Thomas threw himself into the cattle. Jackson focused on the horses. Garrett handled the hiring and purchasing. Nobody paid attention to whether any of it made sense. And now you want me to make sense of it? I want you to find the truth buried in it." Rosa's voice dropped. "Because I've been watching the accounts when I can, and something don't add up. We should be doing better than we are. The cattle sales are good, the horses are selling, but somehow we're always short of cash. You think someone's stealing. I think someone might be creative with the numbers, but I can't prove it, and I'm not good enough with figures to know what I'm looking for." Rosa met Eleanor's eyes. "You are." It was a trust Eleanor hadn't expected. She nodded slowly. "I'll need time. Weeks, probably." "Take it. Just be careful. If you find what I think you'll find—" Rosa didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. After Rosa left, Eleanor rolled up her sleeves and began the painstaking work of creating order from chaos. She started with the most recent month, gathering every scrap of paper, every receipt, every notation. She created stacks, purchases, sales, payroll, miscellaneous. By noon, she'd barely made a dent. She worked through lunch, eating the sandwich Rosa brought her without looking up. She worked through the afternoon heat, through the sounds of men and horses outside, through the gradual migration of shadows across the floor. It was nearly sunset when she found the first discrepancy. It was small, a purchase order for feed that listed quantities in one place and different quantities in another. The difference was only 50 pounds, easily explained as a clerical error. Except when she found the payment receipt, the ranch had been charged for the higher amount. Eleanor set the papers aside and kept digging. Within an hour, she'd found 3 more similar instances. Always small, always just slightly off, always in favor of the vendor, and always signed off by Garrett Hayes. She sat back, her heart racing. This was it. This was what Rosa had suspected. Not grand theft, nothing so obvious. Just steady, careful skimming. A few dollars here, a few dollars there. Over months and years, it would add up to a significant loss. The question was Garrett taking the money directly, or was he getting kickbacks from vendors? And the more important question, what would happen when she reported this to Thomas Steele? A knock on the door made her jump. Jackson stood in the doorway, hat in hand. Rosa said you've been in here all day. Thought you might need some air. Eleanor glanced at the papers surrounding her. I'm in the middle of, it'll still be here tomorrow. His tone was gentle but firm. Come on, I want to show you something. She hesitated, then stood. Her back ached from hours of hunching over documents, and her eyes burned from squinting at poor handwriting. Fresh air sounded like heaven. Jackson led her outside and toward the barn. The evening was cooling fast, the way Wyoming evenings did, and the sky was starting to burn gold and pink. He walked with easy familiarity, pointing out buildings as they passed. That's the main stable. We keep the working horses there, about 40 head. The breeding stock is in the north pasture this time of year. The cattle are scattered across 3 sections of rangeland. Eleanor listened, letting the rhythm of his voice and the beauty of the landscape settle her nerves. After the close confines of the office, the vast openness felt like breathing deep for the first time in hours. They reached a fence overlooking a wide valley. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding snow despite the summer heat. First time I brought my mother out here, Jackson said quietly. She cried. Said it was too much space, too much sky. She missed Boston. Did she ever get used to it? Eventually, she learned to love it, I think. But it took years. He glanced at Eleanor. The West isn't kind to people who aren't ready for it. I'm beginning to understand that. Are you... He turned to face her fully. Because from where I'm standing, you walked into a situation most women would have run from, and you've spent your first full day digging into work that's probably going to make you more enemies. Eleanor met his eyes. Should I have run? I don't know. That depends on what you're looking for. Safety and stability are in short supply here. They're in short supply everywhere. At least here I have a chance to build something real. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Rosa told me what she asked you to look for. Did you find it? Eleanor hesitated. Should she tell him before telling Thomas? But Jackson had been nothing but fair to her since the moment they met. I found discrepancies, she said carefully. Whether they're innocent mistakes or deliberate fraud, I need more time to be certain. And if they are fraud, then I'll report it to your father. Even though it'll cause trouble. Especially because it'll cause trouble. Eleanor turned to face him fully. Mr. Steele, I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to work. If that work requires me to point out uncomfortable truths, then that's what I'll do. Something shifted in Jackson's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. You're tougher than you look, Miss Morrison. I've had to be. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. In Philadelphia, Eleanor had forgotten what real silence sounded like. There was always noise, carriages, voices, construction, commerce. Here the quiet was profound, broken only by wind and the occasional call of a bird. It should have felt lonely. Instead, it felt like peace. I should get back, Eleanor said eventually. I have a few more hours of work before dark. Don't push yourself too hard. This place has a way of grinding people down if they don't pace themselves. I'll be careful. As they walked back toward the house, Jackson said casually, Garrett asked my father to fire you. Eleanor's stomach clenched. When, this morning, said you were disruptive and disrespectful. What did your father say? He told Garrett that if you were disruptive and disrespectful, you'd fit right in with the rest of the ranch. Jackson's smile was brief but genuine. Then he told him to focus on his own work and let you focus on yours. Relief flooded through her. So I'm safe. For now. But Eleanor, he used her first name for the first time, and it sounded strange and intimate in his careful voice. Garrett is proud. You've humiliated him twice now, once in front of me, once in front of the hands. Men like that don't forget. I'll be careful, she repeated. But as she returned to the office and her stacks of incriminating papers, she wondered if careful would be enough, because the numbers didn't lie. And when she presented them to Thomas Steele, everything at Silver Creek was going to change. The only question was whether she'd survive the aftermath. Yeah. The discrepancies multiplied like rabbits over the next week. Eleanor worked through the chaos of Silver Creek's records with the methodical precision of a surgeon, and what she uncovered made her stomach turn. It wasn't just feed purchases, it was everything. Lumber orders that listed one price on the invoice and another on the payment receipt. Tool purchases from vendors who charged premium rates for standard equipment. Payroll records that showed payments to men whose names appeared nowhere else in the ranch documentation ghost workers. Inflated invoices. Kickback schemes so carefully constructed they'd been invisible until someone actually looked. And every single fraudulent transaction bore Garrett Hayes' signature. By the end of the second week, Eleanor had compiled a report that was damning in its simplicity. She'd cross-referenced every purchase against market rates, verified every vendor against town records, and tracked every dollar that had leaked out of Silver Creek's accounts over the past 3 years. The total came to just over $8,000. Not enough to bankrupt the ranch, but enough to explain why a profitable operation always seems short of cash. She sat in the small office on a Saturday evening, staring at the neat columns of numbers, and wondered if she was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Thomas Steele would have to act on this information. There was no way he could ignore fraud of this magnitude. But acting meant confronting Garrett. And Garrett had 8 years of authority, the loyalty of half the ranch hands, and the kind of vindictive pride that didn't forgive humiliation. Eleanor had been at Silver Creek for exactly 14 days. She had no allies except Rosa, no protection except Thomas's distant approval, and no illusions about her chances if Garrett decided to make her life unbearable. But the numbers didn't lie, and Eleanor had never been good at ignoring the truth even when the truth was dangerous. She gathered the report, squared her shoulders, and went to find Thomas Steele. She found him in his study, a cluttered room that smelled of tobacco and old leather. He sat behind a massive desk covered in cattle breeding records, a glass of whiskey at his elbow, reading spectacles perched on his nose. He looked up when she knocked. "Miss Morrison, I expected this visit 3 days ago." Eleanor stepped inside. "I wanted to be thorough." "And are you—" "Yes, sir." "Then let's hear it." Eleanor set the report on his desk. Over the past 3 years, Silver Creek has lost approximately $8,000 to fraudulent purchases, inflated invoices, and payments to non-existent workers. The losses are systematic, carefully disguised, and traceable directly to your foreman's authorization. Thomas's expression didn't change. He picked up the report and began reading, his eyes moving down the pages with the focus of a man who understood numbers, even if he hated keeping them. The silence stretched. Eleanor's hands were shaking, so she clasped them behind her back where he couldn't see. Finally, Thomas set down the report. "You're accusing Garrett of theft." "I'm presenting financial evidence of theft. The accusation is supported by documentation." "Documentation you've had 2 weeks to fabricate." The words hit like a slap. Eleanor's breath caught. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his eyes hard. "You show up here, make an enemy of my foreman on your first day, then conveniently discover evidence of fraud that would get him fired. That's one hell of a coincidence." Eleanor's shock gave way to cold fury. "You think I manufactured this? I think you're smart enough to know in that discrediting Garrett would secure your position here. And I think desperation makes people creative." "Then verify it yourself." Eleanor's voice came out sharp as broken glass. "Every invoice I cited is in your files. Every vendor I contacted is in town. Every price comparison is based on market rates you can confirm independently. If you think I'm lying, prove it." Thomas studied her for a long moment. Then he said, "Garrett has run this ranch for 8 years. He's been loyal, effective, and respected by the men. You've been here 2 weeks. Why should I trust your word over his? Because my word is backed by evidence, and his is backed by familiarity." Eleanor stepped closer to the desk. "I understand that it's easier to doubt me. I'm new, I'm a woman, and I have everything to gain from discrediting your foreman. But look at the numbers, Mr. Steele. Really look. Either I'm the most sophisticated fraud artist in Wyoming, or Garrett has been stealing from you for years. Which seems more likely?" The silence that followed felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. Thomas's face was unreadable, his body language giving nothing away. Then Thomas picked up the report again. Get out. Sir, get out. I'll review this myself. If your numbers hold up, we'll talk. If they don't, you'll be on the next stage east. It wasn't the response Eleanor had hoped for, but it was better than outright dismissal. She nodded once and left her legs unsteady beneath her skirts. In the hallway, she nearly collided with Jackson. Steady, he said, catching her elbow. You look like you've seen a ghost. I just presented your father with evidence that his foreman has been stealing from him for 3 years. He thinks I fabricated it. Jackson's expression went carefully neutral. Did you, The question, quiet, direct, felt like a betrayal. Eleanor pulled her arm free. You too. I'm asking what you'd want me to ask if our positions were reversed. Did you fabricate evidence to secure your position here? No. The word came out flat. Every number in that report is accurate. Every invoice is real. Every vendor is verifiable. But apparently that's not enough, because I'm too new and too female to be trusted. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, show me. What? Show me the evidence. If it's real, I'll know. I've worked with Garrett for 8 years. I know his patterns. Eleanor wanted to refuse out of pure stubborn pride, but pragmatism won out. She led Jackson back to the office and pulled out the original documents, invoices, receipts, payment records. She walked him through each discrepancy, showing him the pattern of inflation, the ghost workers, the carefully constructed fraud. Jackson listened without interrupting his expression, growing darker with each revelation. When she finished, he sat back in the chair and ran a hand over his face. How did I miss this? You weren't looking. Why would you? Garrett had your trust. He had my mother's trust first. She hired him right after we lost our previous foreman to a riding accident. She said he was competent and reliable. Jackson's voice was hollow. She'd be devastated to know he was stealing from us while she was dying. Eleanor hadn't expected the personal pain in his voice. She said carefully, your father might still not believe it. He'll believe it. Jackson stood gathering the documents. He's just being careful. I'm taking these to him with my endorsement. He might think you're biased. He might, but I'd rather stand with the truth and be wrong than stand with a lie and be complicit. He paused at the door. Eleanor, thank you. I know this wasn't easy. After he left, Eleanor sat alone in the office, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into evening. Somewhere outside, men were laughing. A horse whinnied. The wind picked up, rattling the window. She'd done what she came to do. She'd found the truth and presented it clearly. Now all she could do was wait to see if the truth mattered more than convenience. The knock came just after dawn. Eleanor had spent a restless night expecting violence. Garrett breaking down her door, angry ranch hands demanding she leave her belongings thrown into the dirt. Instead, she got Rosa's gentle tap and worried face. Thomas wants to see you in his study. Now. Eleanor dressed quickly and made her way downstairs. The house was quiet, too quiet. Usually by this hour, the kitchen would be full of breakfast chaos. Instead, there was only silence and the smell of cold coffee. Thomas's study door was open. Inside, she found not just Thomas, but Jackson and Garrett. The foreman stood rigid near the window, his face a thundercloud. Jackson leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Thomas sat behind his desk, her report open in front of him. Miss Morrison, Thomas said, I spent last night verifying your numbers. Rode into town before dawn to check with vendors. Had Jackson pull every invoice from the files. He paused. Your report is accurate. Relief flooded through Eleanor, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm glad you verified it independently. Garrett claims the discrepancies are innocent mistakes. Clerical errors, vendor overcharges he didn't catch. Eleanor looked at Garrett. The foreman's eyes were filled with pure hatred. And do you believe that explanation? She asked Thomas. No. Thomas's voice was flat. Because innocent mistakes don't follow patterns. They don't consistently favor the same vendors. And they don't include payments to workers who don't exist. He turned to Garrett. You're fired. You have until noon to clear out of the foreman's cabin. I'll pay you through yesterday. After that, you're off my land. Garrett's face went white, then red. You're taking her word over mine, a woman who's been here 2 weeks. I'm taking evidence over loyalty. There's a difference. This is because of her. Garrett stabbed a finger toward Eleanor. She came here stirring up trouble, making accusations, turning you against your own men, and you're fool enough to listen. I listened to the numbers, Thomas said coldly. They don't lie even when the people presenting them might have their own agenda. Now get out before I have the hands throw you out. Garrett turned to Jackson. You know me. You know I've given everything to this ranch. Are you going to stand there and let her destroy me? Jackson met his eyes steadily. I'm going to stand here and let you face the consequences of your choices. You stole from us while my mother was dying. You stole from my father. You stole from every honest hand on this ranch who trusted you. His voice was quiet but absolute. You destroyed yourself. For a moment, Eleanor thought Garrett might lunge at her. His hands clenched into fists, his whole body radiating violence. But Thomas stood, and something in the old man's posture made Garrett think better of it. You'll regret this, Garrett said to Eleanor. All of you. This ranch will fall apart without me, and when it does, you'll wish you'd listened. Get out, Thomas repeated. Garrett left, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. The silence that followed felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. Thomas sat back down heavily. Miss Morrison, you've cost me my foreman in 2 weeks into employment. That's either impressive or disastrous. Time will tell which. I did what you hired me to do, sir. Find inefficiencies and report them. You did more than that. You found corruption and exposed it, even knowing it would make you enemies. Thomas's expression was unreadable. That takes either courage or stupidity. Sometimes they're the same thing. A ghost of a smile touched Thomas's face. True enough, he glanced at Jackson. We need a new foreman. Someone the men will respect, someone who knows the work and won't steal us blind. I'll do it, Jackson said. Temporarily at least, until we find someone permanent. You've got enough on your plate with the horses. Then I'll work longer days. We don't have much choice, Father. The hands need leadership, especially now. If we bring in someone from outside too quickly, they'll see it as desperation. Thomas nodded slowly. All right, but we start looking for a permanent replacement immediately. I won't have you running yourself into the ground. Agreed, man. Jackson turned to Eleanor. You should stay inside today. Keep away from the bunkhouse. Some of the hands are loyal to Garrett, and they won't take his firing well. But I have work to do, Eleanor said. The work can wait. Your safety can't. There was something in his tone that made Eleanor pause, a protective edge that went beyond professional concern. She nodded. I'll be careful. After the men left, Eleanor stood alone in Thomas's study, listening to raised voices from the direction of the bunkhouse. Garrett was telling his version of the story, and from the angry shouts, at least some of the hands were believing him. She'd known this would be difficult. She'd known making enemies of powerful men had consequences. But standing in that quiet study, listening to her name being cursed by people who'd never even spoken to her, Eleanor felt the weight of isolation settle heavy on her shoulders. The afternoon proved her fears justified. Eleanor stayed in the main house as Jackson had suggested, working on organizing the remaining financial records and trying to ignore the tension crackling through Silver Creek like static before a storm. Through the window, she could see men gathering in tight clusters, their body language angry. Twice, she heard her name shouted, followed by laughter that held no humor. Rosa brought her lunch and lingering worry. Jackson's talking to the hands now, explaining the situation. But some of them, she trailed off, shaking her head, some of them won't care about evidence. They'll just see a woman who got their foreman fired. Should I leave? Eleanor asked quietly. And go where you've got no money for a stage ticket, no family to wire for help. Rosa's voice was gentle but frank. Besides, running now would just confirm what they're saying, that you're trouble. Better to stay and prove them wrong. How do I prove them wrong when they won't even speak to me? By doing your job so well they can't deny your value. By being fair and honest and consistent. Rosa squeezed her shoulder. I know it's hard, but you've got backbone, girl. Use it. After Rosa left, Eleanor returned to the numbers, losing herself in the clean logic of accounting. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't judge. Numbers simply were. She was deep in concentration when Jackson knocked on the office door. How bad is it? She asked without looking up. Just hands quit. Said they wouldn't work for a ranch that fired a good foreman on a woman's word. Jackson's voice was carefully neutral. The rest are staying, but about half of them aren't happy about it. Eleanor set down her pen. I'm sorry. Don't be. The ones who quit weren't worth keeping if they'd rather support theft than honesty. He came into the room, closing the door behind him. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. All right. Are you safe here? The question caught her off guard. What do you mean? I mean that you've made enemies powerful ones. Garrett is gone, but he's got friends in town. Some of the hands who stayed are still loyal to him. And there are men on this ranch who don't think women should have the kind of authority you have been given. Jackson's eyes were serious. So I'm asking, do you feel safe? Eleanor considered the question carefully. Did she feel safe? Not entirely. But safety had never been guaranteed, not in Philadelphia and certainly not here. I feel as safe as I did yesterday, she said finally, which is to say cautiously optimistic with realistic awareness of danger. Jackson almost smiled. That's a politician's answer. It's an honest answer. I won't lie and say I'm not worried, but I also won't run just because some men are angry. If I do that, I'll spend my whole life running. Fair enough. Jackson moved to the window, looking out at the ranch. My father wants me to assign someone to watch out for you. Make sure no one bothers you on your way to and from the house. Like a guard. Like insurance. He turned back to face her. Eleanor, I know you're independent. I know you don't want to be seen as weak or needing protection. But independence and stupidity aren't the same thing. If something happened to you because we didn't take reasonable precautions, I'd never forgive myself. The use of her first name again. The genuine concern in his voice. It softened something in Eleanor's chest. Who did you have in mind? She asked. Marcus Webb. He's been here 5 years, he's solid, and he's got a sister back east, so he understands that women aren't delicate flowers. Jackson paused. He'll walk you to meals and back to your room at night. Nothing intrusive, just presence. And if I refuse, then I'll assign him anyway and you'll just have to be annoyed about it. Eleanor couldn't help it, she laughed. It came out slightly desperate, edged with exhaustion, but genuine. You're very stubborn, Mr. Steele. Runs in the family, Miss Morrison. The moment held something unspoken passing between them. Then Jackson cleared his throat and stepped back. I should get back to work. We're short-handed now, and the horses don't care about ranch politics. After he left, Eleanor sat in the quiet office and tried to identify the strange warmth in her chest. It felt like gratitude, but also like something more complicated. Something she didn't have a name for yet. She returned to her numbers, but her mind kept drifting to Jackson's concern, his protection, the way he'd said her name like it mattered. Focus, she told herself. You're here to work, not to develop feelings for the ranch owner's son. But the warmth stayed stubborn and persistent as Wyoming wind. The next weeks fell into an uneasy rhythm. Eleanor worked through the financial records, creating order from chaos and implementing systems to prevent future fraud. Marcus Webb proved to be exactly what Jackson had promised, a quiet, competent presence who walked her to meals and saw her safely back to her room without making her feel imprisoned. The ranch hands divided into clear camps. About half treated Eleanor with cautious respect, acknowledging her work and offering polite greetings. The other half ignored her completely, their silence more aggressive than any words could have been. Eleanor learned to navigate the tension. She kept her head down, did her work excellently, and tried not to flinch every time she heard Garrett's name spoken with reverence by men who'd never seen the evidence of his theft. But it was exhausting. Every day felt like walking a tightrope, one wrong word away from disaster. Jackson, now acting as foreman, in addition to his horse training duties, worked himself ragged. Eleanor would see him before dawn reviewing the day's assignments with the hands. She'd see him at noon settling disputes and making decisions. She'd see him after dark still in the barn, checking on a colicky horse or repairing a broken stall door. You're going to collapse, she told him one evening when she found him in the barn, his face gray with exhaustion. Can't afford to, he said, not looking up from the bridle he was mending. The hands are watching to see if I can actually do this job. If I show weakness, I lose their respect. You'll lose more than respect if you work yourself to death. That made him look up, surprise flickering across his features. Then unexpectedly he smiled. You know, most people are more polite about that observation. Most people lie to make you feel better. I don't see the point. Jackson set down the bridle. Why is that? Most women I've met and are experts at social niceties. Most women haven't had to survive on truth alone. Eleanor leaned against the stall door. When you have nothing else, no money, no connections, no protection, honesty becomes your currency. It's all I have to offer that makes me useful. That's not true. One day I came here with a trunk and 17 cents. Every bit of value I've created here has been through competence and honesty. If I start lying to make people comfortable, I lose the only thing that makes me worth keeping around. Jackson stood moving closer. Eleanor, you really believe that your only value is in being useful? The question unsettled her. What else would it be? Your intelligence, your courage, your refusal to accept injustice, even when accepting it would be easier. He paused. You're worth more than just the work you do. The warmth in his voice, the way he looked at her, it made something flutter in Eleanor's chest. Dangerous, a voice in her head whispered. You can't afford this. She stepped back. I should go. Rosa will wonder where I am. Eleanor. Good night, Mr. Steele. She fled before he could say anything else, her heart hammering. Back in her room, she pressed her hands against her flushed cheeks and tried to calm her racing thoughts. This was foolish. More than foolish, it was suicidal. Jackson Steele was the ranch owner's son. She was hired help who'd already made enemies. Any hint of impropriety between them would destroy what little credibility she'd built. Besides, he didn't mean anything by it. He was just being kind the way he'd been kind from the beginning. Reading anything else into his words was the desperate fantasy of a woman who'd been alone too long. But as she lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, she couldn't quite convince herself that the warmth in his voice had been merely kindness. And that terrified her more than any threat from Garrett's allies ever could. Summer deepened into the kind of heat that made the air shimmer and turned the ranch into a proving ground for human endurance. The hayfield stretched golden and ready, and every able body was needed to bring in the harvest before the weather turned. Eleanor watched from the office window as men worked in coordinated rhythm, their shirts dark with sweat, their movements efficient despite the brutal temperature. Jackson was out there with them, working twice as hard as anyone else to prove he could lead by example. She'd seen him at breakfast that morning, his face drawn with exhaustion that went bone deep, and she'd wanted to say something. But what could she say? Stop working so hard, take care of yourself. He'd only remind her that the ranch didn't care about fatigue, and neither could he. So she'd kept silent and returned to her numbers, trying to ignore the worry that sat heavy in her stomach. By mid-July, she'd reorganized the entire accounting system. Every purchase now required documentation, every payment needed Jackson's or Thomas's signature, every vendor had been vetted and renegotiated for fair rates. The ranch's finances were transparent, traceable, and fraud-proof. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a different kind of battle. Because the cleaner the books became, the more obvious it was that Eleanor's work was nearly done. She'd been hired to fix a problem, and she'd fixed it. Soon Thomas would have to decide whether keeping her on was practical or whether she'd simply worked herself out of a job. The thought of leaving Silver Creek made her chest tight in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. She was still wrestling with that realization when Rosa found her in the office one afternoon, her expression troubled. There's talk in town, Rosa said without preamble, about you and Jackson. Only Eleanor's stomach dropped. What kind of talk? The kind that says you've got your hooks in the boss's son, that you're scheming to secure yourself an easy life through marriage instead of honest work. Rosa's voice was gentle but firm. It's nonsense, of course, but nonsense spreads like wildfire. And right now, half of Silver Creek's reputation is tied up in whether people think you are respectable or opportunistic. I haven't done anything improper, Eleanor said, hating how defensive she sounded. I know that, Jackson knows that, but perception matters especially for a woman in your position. Rosa sat down heavily. The problem is that Jackson's been protective of you. Everyone can see it. And some folks are reading into that protection things that aren't there. She paused. Or things that are. Eleanor looked up sharply. What do you mean? Rosa's eyes searched her face. Are there, Eleanor, feelings between you and Jackson? Eleanor wanted to deny it, wanted to say that she felt nothing for Jackson beyond professional respect and gratitude for his fairness. But she'd built her entire life on honesty, and she wouldn't start lying now. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "Sometimes I think he's just being kind. Other times—" She trailed off, not sure how to put into words the way her heart raced when he looked at her, the warmth that flooded through her when he said her name, the ache she felt watching him work himself into exhaustion. "Other times it feels like more," Rosa finished. "Yes, but that terrifies me because even if he felt something, which I'm not saying he does acting on, it would destroy both of us. People already think I'm using him for position. If anything actually happened between us, it would confirm every ugly rumor." Rosa nodded slowly. "So what are you going to do?" Eleanor pressed her hands flat against the desk, feeling the solid wood beneath her palms. "The only thing I can do, keep my distance, be professional, prove that I'm here for the work, not for him." "That's going to be hard," Rosa said gently, "especially if he doesn't want distance. Then he'll have to accept it anyway, because I won't be the woman who ruins his reputation or confirms everyone's worst assumptions about why I'm really here." But keeping distance from Jackson proved harder than Eleanor anticipated. The ranch's reduced workforce meant everyone worked closer together, and Jackson seemed to be everywhere, checking on the hay harvest, managing the rotating shifts, settling disputes between hands who were still divided over Garrett's firing. And every time Eleanor saw him, her resolution weakened. It came to a head on a scorching afternoon in late July. Eleanor had volunteered to bring water to the men working the far hayfield, partly to be useful and partly to escape the suffocating heat of the office. She loaded a wagon with full canteens and drove it out herself, enjoying the brief illusion of freedom that came with being away from the main house. The hayfield was organized chaos. Men moved in lines, cutting and bundling, with practiced efficiency. The air smelled of grass and sweat and summer heat. Eleanor distributed water, receiving grateful nods from some hands and cold silence from others. She was almost finished when she saw Jackson working at the field's edge, his shirt soaked through his hat tilted to shade his face. She approached with the last canteen, intending to hand it over and leave quickly. But when she got close enough to see his face clearly, alarm shot through her. His skin was flushed, dark red. His breathing came shallow and fast, and when he reached for the canteen, his hand trembled. "When did you last drink water?" she asked sharply. "I'm fine," he said, his voice rough. "You're not fine. You're showing signs of heat exhaustion." Eleanor pushed the canteen into his hands. "Drink, all of it. I need to finish. You need to not collapse in front of your men." She kept her voice low but fierce. "Drink the water, Jackson. That's not a request." Something in her bone made him comply. He drank deeply, and Eleanor could see the exact moment the cool water hit his system, some of the dangerous flush faded from his face. "There's shade by the wagon," she said. "Sit there for 10 minutes. "I can't just—" "Yes, you can. You're the foreman. Delegate." When he hesitated, she added quietly, "Please, for me." That broke through his resistance. He followed her to the wagon and sat in its shadow at his back against the wheel. Eleanor dampened her handkerchief with water and handed it to him. "Put this on your neck." He obeyed, closing his eyes as the cool cloth touched his overheated skin. "You're very bossy when you're worried," he murmured. "I'm not worried. I'm preventing a crisis." But her hands were shaking as she checked his pulse, counting the beats against her own racing heart. Jackson caught her wrist gently. "Eleanor, your pulse is too fast. You need to rest longer." "Eleanor, look at me." She did reluctantly and found his eyes already on her, dark and intense and full of something that made her breath catch. "I'm all right," he said softly. "Thanks to you. You wouldn't need saving if you'd take care of yourself." "I know, I'm working on it." His thumb traced a small circle on the inside of her wrist, probably unconsciously, but it sent heat racing up her arm. "You shouldn't worry about me so much." "Someone has to. You're clearly incapable of it." "Is that the only reason?" The question hung between them, dangerous and electric. Eleanor knew she should pull away, should deflect, should maintain the professional distance she'd promised herself. But his hand was warm on her wrist, and his eyes held hers with an intensity that made lying impossible. "No," she whispered. "That's not the only reason." Jackson's expression shifted surprise and heat and something deeper. Eleanor by Mr. Steele, one of the hands was approaching, wiping sweat from his face. We've got a problem with the bailing equipment. Can you take a look? The moment shattered, Jackson released Eleanor's wrist and stood steadier now, but still too flushed for her comfort. I'll be right there. He looked back at her. We need to talk later. Please. Eleanor nodded, not trusting her voice. She watched him walk away, her wrist still tingling where he'd touched her heart hammering against her ribs. This was exactly what she'd been trying to avoid. This feeling, this want, this dangerous pull towards something that could only end in disaster. But as she drove the empty wagon back to the ranch, she couldn't quite convince herself that disaster would be worse than never knowing what that conversation might have held. The talk came that evening, and it wasn't at all what Eleanor expected. She was in her room changing out of her dust-covered clothes when she heard raised voices from downstairs. Male voices, angry and getting louder. She opened her door cautiously and heard Thomas's distinctive growl. I don't care what people in town are saying. The girl's done excellent work. The girl, came another voice, one of the ranch hands, Eleanor thought, has got Jackson so twisted up he can't think straight. Half the men are saying she's playing him for a fool, and the other half, that was Jackson, his voice dangerously quiet. The other half think you're playing her. Either way, it's causing problems. Men are taking sides, making bets, treating this whole thing like entertainment. Eleanor's stomach turned. She pressed her hand against the wall, feeling suddenly sick. What exactly are you suggesting? Jackson asked, each word precise and cold. I'm suggesting that you either make your intentions clear or send her away, because this middle ground is tearing the ranch apart. My intentions, Jackson said slowly, are none of the men's business. Neither are Miss Morrison's. What is their business is doing their jobs and keeping their gossip to themselves. With respect, sir, that's not how people work. You can't have an unmarried woman living in the main house working closely with the boss's son and expect no one to talk. Then perhaps, Rose's voice cut in sharply, you should be more concerned with the quality of men's character than the quantity of their opinions. Any hand who's more interested in gossip than work can find employment elsewhere. Silence fell tense and crackling. Then Thomas spoke again, his tone weary. Everyone out. I need to talk to my son alone. Footsteps, a door closing, then quiet. Eleanor should have moved away from her door, should have given them privacy. But she couldn't make herself move. They're not entirely wrong, Thomas said after a long pause. This situation can't continue as it is. What situation? Jackson's voice was tight. A competent employee you're developing feelings for. Don't bother denying it. I've got eyes. More silence. Then Jackson said quietly, she's remarkable, Father. She's smart and brave and honest in a way most people never manage. And yes, I have feelings for her. But I would never act on them in a way that would compromise her reputation or position here. But you want to. That's irrelevant. The hell it is. Thomas's voice softened slightly. Son, I'm not blind to what she's accomplished here. She saved us thousands of dollars, she rooted out corruption, and she's built systems that will keep us honest for years to come. She's earned her place at Silver Creek. He paused. But that doesn't change the fact that people are talking, and that talk will hurt her more than you. Oh, so what do you suggest? I suggest you figure out what you actually want. If you want her as an employee, keep your distance and let the gossip die. If you want her as something more, court her properly. Make your intentions public and respectable. Give people no room to question her character. And if she doesn't want to be courted, then you'll have your answer, won't you? Eleanor moved away from the door, then her heart racing. She crossed to her window and stared out at the darkening mountains, trying to organize her chaotic thoughts. Jackson had feelings for her. Real feelings confirmed by his own admission to his father. And Thomas Stern, pragmatic. Thomas was giving his blessing for Jackson to court her, provided it was done respectably. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a precipice. Because if Jackson courted her, people would say she'd trapped him. They'd say she'd manipulated her way from hired help to ranch wife through calculated seduction. Every ugly rumor would be confirmed in their minds, no matter how honorably Jackson conducted himself. But if she refused him, she'd be turning away the first real connection she'd felt since her mother died. She'd be choosing loneliness and safety over the terrifying possibility of being truly seen and valued by someone who mattered. The knock on her door came an hour later, soft but unmistakable. Eleanor opened it to find Jackson standing in the hallway, his hat in his hands, his expression serious. "May I speak with you?" he asked. Downstairs in the parlor, with the door open. The careful propriety of the request nearly broke her heart. Of course, they went downstairs in silence. The parlor was a formal room, rarely used, filled with furniture that had belonged to Jackson's mother. He gestured to a chair and took one across from her, maintaining careful distance. "I need to be honest with you," he said. "You probably heard the argument earlier." "Some of it," Eleanor admitted quietly. "Then you know that there's talk about us. And you should know that the talk isn't baseless." He met her eyes directly. "I have developed feelings for you, Eleanor. Strong feelings that go beyond professional respect or simple attraction." Eleanor's breath caught. Hearing him say it directly without artifice or pretense made it impossible to hide behind polite deflection. "I know this puts you in a difficult position," Jackson continued. "I know that any association with me opens you up to judgment and speculation. I know that people will say you encourage my attention for your own advancement. And I know that's monstrously unfair." "Then why tell me?" Eleanor asked quietly. "Why not just maintain distance and let the feelings fade?" "Because I tried that. For weeks now, I've tried to tell myself that what I feel is just gratitude for your work, or admiration for your courage, or simple loneliness. But it's not." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. "You challenge me, Eleanor. You call me on my mistakes. You refuse to accept half-truths. You see the ranch see me with clear eyes instead of romantic fantasy. You're the first woman I've met who treats me like a person instead of a prize to be won." "That's because I don't see you as a prize," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I see you as someone who's trying to do right by people who depend on him. Someone who works himself sick, trying to prove he's worthy of responsibility he already earned. Someone who's kind without expecting reward for it." Jackson's expression softened. "Then you understand why I can't just let this fade. Why I needed to speak honestly with you about what I'm feeling and what I want." "What do you want?" "Permission to court you. Properly, publicly, with full respect for your reputation. I want to take you to town dances, to Sunday dinners, to church. I want people to see that my interest in you is honest and honorable. I want to give you the choice I've been afraid to offer, the choice to say yes or no without fearing for your position here." Eleanor's throat tightened. "And if I say no, then you keep your room, your place at Silver Creek, but with absolutely no change in how you are treated. My father has already agreed to that condition. Your work here stands on its own merit regardless of your personal feelings toward me." It was everything she should want. Safety, security, freedom of choice without threat of consequence. But the very generosity of the offer made her next words harder to say. "Jackson, if I let you court me, every person who's ever doubted my integrity will feel vindicated. They'll say I came to Wyoming hunting for a husband and played you perfectly. They'll say I manufactured the evidence against Garrett to secure my position close to you. They'll turn everything I've accomplished into proof of calculation instead of competence." "I know. And you're asking me to endure that anyway." "No." Jackson shook his head. "I'm asking you to let me stand beside you while you endure it. To let me make my intentions so clear in public that anyone who questions your character has to question mine equally. We'll face the gossip together and we'll prove them wrong through consistency and honesty. That could take years. I'm prepared for that. They might never believe us. Then we'll build a life that doesn't require their belief." He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling so they were eye level. "Eleanor, I'm not offering you an easy path. I'm offering you a partnership with someone who sees your worth and wants to build something real with you. But only if you want that too. Only if the risk feels worth taking." Eleanor looked into his eyes and saw the truth there, earnest, vulnerable, absolutely certain. He meant every word. He would weather the storms of judgment and gossip if it meant being with her honestly. The question was whether she was brave enough to let him. She thought of Philadelphia, of years spent making herself small and acceptable to avoid judgment. She thought of the journey west, of the courage it had taken to board that stagecoach with 17 cents, and a promise that turned out to be a lie. She thought of standing up to Garrett, of presenting evidence of fraud, knowing it would make her enemies, of choosing truth over safety again and again. She'd spent her whole life being brave in small ways. Maybe it was time to be brave in a way that mattered. Yes, she said softly, court me, publicly, properly, and we'll prove them all wrong together. Jackson's expression blazed with relief and joy. He took her hand carefully like she was something precious. Thank you. I promise I'll do everything in my power to deserve your trust. You already have, Eleanor said. That's why I'm saying yes. He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, brief, chaste, but full of promise. Then he stood stepping back to maintain propriety. I'll speak to my father tonight. We'll make the announcement at Sunday dinner. Give people no room to whisper behind your back. They'll whisper anyway. Then we'll give them something worth whispering about a courtship that shows exactly how much I value you. After he left, Eleanor sat in the quiet parlor and tried to process what she'd just agreed to. She'd said yes to courting, yes to making their relationship public, yes to facing judgment and gossip and speculation head on. It was terrifying. It was also, she realized with dawning wonder, the first time in her adult life that she'd chosen something purely because she wanted it, not because it was safe or practical or socially acceptable. She'd chosen Jackson Steele complicated and exhausted and honest. She'd chosen the possibility of love over the guarantee of loneliness. And whatever came next, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else since arriving in Wyoming, with backbone honesty and the stubborn refusal to let fear make her small. Sunday dinner at Silver Creek was a formal affair reserved for family and honored guests. When Thomas announced at breakfast that there would be a special announcement at the meal, the entire ranch buzzed with speculation. Eleanor spent the morning in a state of controlled terror, her hands steady only through sheer force of will as she helped Rosa prepare the dining room. You're sure about this? Rosa asked for the third time, arranging silverware with unnecessary precision. No, Eleanor admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. That's either the bravest thing I've ever heard or the most foolish. You said those were often the same thing. Rosa smiled despite her worry. I did, didn't I? Well, at least you'll face gossip head-on instead of letting it fester. That takes spine. The guests began arriving at noon, neighboring ranchers and their families, the town's minister, a few of the more respectable businessmen from the settlement 15 miles north. Eleanor recognized the strategy immediately. Thomas was assembling witnesses, people whose opinions carried weight in the territory. Whatever was announced today would spread through Wyoming faster than wildfire. She dressed with care in her best dress, the dark blue wool she'd worn to her first dinner at Silver Creek, now altered and freshened until it looked almost elegant. She pinned her hair in a style that was practical but softer than her usual severe bun. When she looked in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the desperate woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach 2 months ago. In her place stood someone who looked almost confident. Almost. Jackson was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she descended. He wore a clean suit, his dark hair combed back, and he looked every inch the rancher's son, confident, capable, worthy of respect. And the expression on his face when he saw her made her breath catch. You look beautiful, he said quietly. You look terrified, she replied. I am, but I'm doing it anyway. He offered his arm. Ready. Not remotely. Good. Neither am I. We'll be brave together. The dining room was full of conversation and the smell of Rosa's excellent cooking. Eleanor felt every eye turn towards her as she entered on Jackson's arm, saw the speculation and surprise flash across multiple faces. She kept her spine straight and her expression serene, channeling every lesson in dignity her mother had ever taught her. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. He waited until everyone was seated and the first course was served before standing glass in hand. Thank you all for joining us today. He began, his voice carrying easily across the room. As most of you know, Silver Creek has undergone some changes recently. We've improved our operations, streamlined our finances, and dealt with some unfortunate discoveries about fraud in our management. Several heads nodded. The Garrett situation was common knowledge by now, though opinions varied wildly on whether his firing had been justified. These improvements are largely due to the exceptional work of Miss Eleanor Morrison. Thomas gestured toward Eleanor. She arrived here in June with nothing but competence and courage, and in 2 months she's proven herself invaluable to this ranch's success. Eleanor felt her cheeks warm as attention focused on her. She kept her eyes on Thomas, refusing to look around and see who was judging. However, Thomas continued, there has been talk, speculation about Miss Morrison's intentions and about my son's regard for her. So today I'm putting an end to speculation by making the truth clear. He looked directly at Jackson. Son. Jackson stood, his jaw tight with tension, but his voice steady. Thank you, Father. I'll be direct because that's what this situation requires. He turned to face the room. I have asked Miss Morrison for permission to court her, and she has accepted. My intentions toward her are completely honorable. I'm pursuing this relationship publicly with my family's blessing and with full respect for her reputation and character. The silence that followed was profound. Eleanor could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. Then Mrs. Patterson, the wife of the neighboring ranch owner, spoke up. That's quite sudden, isn't it? The girl's only been here 2 months. Long enough to prove her worth, Thomas said firmly, and long enough for my son to recognize her quality. Or long enough for a clever woman to position herself advantageously, came another voice, Mr. Thornton, one of the businessmen from town. Eleanor's hands clenched in her lap, but before she could respond, Jackson spoke, his voice dangerous and quiet. Mr. Thornton, I'll thank you to speak respectfully about the woman I'm courting. Miss Morrison has done nothing but honest work since arriving at Silver Creek. If you're suggesting otherwise, I'd like to hear your evidence. Thornton had the grace to look uncomfortable. I'm simply saying what others are thinking, that the timing is convenient. The timing, Eleanor said, her voice clear, despite her racing heart, is irrelevant to the truth. I came to Wyoming seeking honest employment. I found it. I performed my duties to the best of my ability, and along the way I developed respect and affection for a man who has treated me with more fairness and dignity than I've experienced anywhere else. She met Thornton's eyes directly. If you find that suspicious, perhaps you should examine why you think a woman couldn't possibly earn regard through merit alone. The sharp intake of breath from several guests told Eleanor she'd crossed a line. But she was tired of being polite, tired of making herself small to avoid judgment. Mrs. Patterson surprised everyone by laughing. Well said, Miss Morrison. I like a woman with backbone. She turned to her husband. Henry didn't. I tell you, this one was different. Most Eastern girls would have collapsed under Garrett's bullying. You did, Mr. Patterson agreed, studying Eleanor with new interest. And I heard she saved Silver Creek $8,000 by catching his fraud. That true? Every word Thomas confirmed. The books are available for anyone who wants to verify her findings. And you're certain she didn't fabricate evidence to secure her position. This from Mr. Winters, another rancher. I verified every claim personally, Thomas said coldly. As did Jackson, as did the vendors in town. The fraud was real, systematic, and substantial. Miss Morrison exposed it despite knowing it would make her enemies. That's not calculation, that's integrity. The conversation continued, questions and opinions flowing around the table. Some guests remained skeptical, their expressions closed and judgmental. Others seemed genuinely impressed by Eleanor's accomplishments and willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. But through it all, Jackson sat beside her, his presence steady and unwavering. When someone questioned whether a romance between employer and employee was appropriate, Jackson responded with calm precision. Miss Morrison's position at Silver Creek is secure regardless of our personal relationship. My father has agreed that her employment stands on its own merit. She has complete freedom to accept or refuse my courtship without fear of losing her livelihood. And if the courtship fails, Mrs. Patterson asked not unkindly, then she continues working here if she chooses, Jackson said simply. We're not children. We understand that courtship doesn't guarantee marriage. But we also believe in facing possibilities honestly instead of hiding from them out of fear. Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. He meant it every word. This wasn't a performance or a strategic move. It was Jackson being exactly who he'd always been, direct, honest, willing to state difficult truths clearly. The meal continued with lighter conversation, though Eleanor could feel the undercurrent of judgment still flowing beneath the surface pleasantries. But gradually, as the afternoon wore on, something shifted. Perhaps it was the way Jackson spoke about her contributions to the ranch with genuine pride. Perhaps it was Thomas's unwavering support. Perhaps it was simply that Eleanor refused to act ashamed or apologetic for pursuing happiness. Whatever the reason, by the time dessert was served, the atmosphere had thawed from hostile to cautiously accepting. After the guests departed, Eleanor helped Rosa clear the dishes, while Jackson and Thomas met with some of the ranchers on the porch. Through the window, she could hear fragments of conversation: cattle prices, water rights, the upcoming territorial election. That went better than I expected, Rosa said, scraping plates with vigorous efficiency. Half of them think I'm a scheming opportunist, Eleanor replied. Only half. That's progress. Rosa grinned. Besides the ones who matter most, the Pattersons, the Reverend Mrs. Holbrook, they all seemed impressed. Their opinions carry weight. And the ones who weren't impressed will find something else to gossip about within a week. That's how small communities work. The scandal is only interesting until the next scandal arrives. Eleanor wanted to believe that, but doubt gnawed at her. She'd made herself a public target today. Every interaction with Jackson would now be scrutinized, every gesture analyzed for proof of calculation or impropriety. As if summoning her thoughts, Jackson appeared in the kitchen doorway. Walk with me. Rosa made a shooing gesture. Go on, I'll finish here. The evening had cooled to something almost pleasant. Jackson led Eleanor away from the main house toward the fence line that overlooked the valley. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber that made the harsh landscape look almost gentle. You were magnificent today, Jackson said when they were alone. The way you spoke to T.D. Thornton, I've never seen him shut down so completely. I probably shouldn't have been so sharp. Yes, you should have. He was questioning your character. You defended it perfectly. Jackson leaned against the fence, his gaze on the horizon. I know this was hard, having our private feelings made public, facing judgment from people who don't know you. It was necessary, Eleanor said simply. Better to face it directly than let speculation poison everything. Do you regret saying yes? She considered the question honestly. Did she regret it? The fear, the judgment, the constant awareness that people were watching and waiting for her to confirm their worst assumptions. No, she said finally. I regret that honesty requires this much courage, but I don't regret choosing you. Jackson turned to face her fully, his expression serious. I'm going to court you properly, Eleanor. The way you deserve. Next Saturday, there's a dance in town. I'd like to take you. Publicly. That will cause more talk. Good. Let them talk. Let them see that I'm proud to be seen with you, that I'm not hiding our relationship or treating it like something shameful. He reached out, taking her hand carefully. I want to give them no room to question my intentions or your worth. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands. His palm was calloused from ranch work, warm and solid against hers. It would be so easy to lean into this, to let herself believe in the possibility of partnership and shared future. But fear whispered warnings. What if this was a mistake? What if the gossip never faded? What if she'd traded security for a romance that would eventually collapse under the weight of public judgment? What are you thinking? Jackson asked quietly. That I'm terrified, Eleanor admitted. That I've spent my whole life being careful and now I'm doing something reckless. That this could destroy everything I've built here. It could, Jackson agreed. But Eleanor, being careful didn't protect you in Philadelphia. Being careful didn't save you from desperation or dangerous men or losing everything anyway. Maybe it's time to try something different. And if different fails, then we'll face that failure honestly and we'll both survive it. But I'd rather try and fail than spend my life wondering what might have been. He squeezed her hand gently. I can't promise this will be easy. I can't promise people will stop judging you. But I can promise that I'll stand beside you through every difficulty and I'll never give anyone reason to question whether my regard for you is real. Eleanor met his eyes and saw the truth there, steadfast, certain, absolutely sincere. He meant every word. He would weather the storms with her, would defend her reputation as fiercely as he'd defend his own. The realization settled something in her chest. She'd been alone for so long, fighting every battle with only her own strength to rely on. The idea of having a partner, someone who would share the burden of being judged and found wanting it, was almost too much to believe in. But Jackson was offering exactly that. Not rescue, not protection from consequences. Just partnership through whatever came next. All right, she said. Take me to the dance. Let them see us together. Let's show them what choosing each other looks like. Jackson's smile was like sunrise. Thank you for trusting me, for being brave enough to try. Winnie, thank you for making it worth the risk. They stood in the cooling evening, hands joined, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Around them, the ranch settled into its evening rhythm, cattle lowing in the distance, horses nickering in the barn, men finishing their day's work with tired satisfaction. It was a good life, Eleanor thought. Hard but honest, demanding but fair. And now, maybe it could be more than just survival. Maybe it could be a future built on partnership and mutual respect. Maybe it could be home. The week leading up to the dance was a masterclass in social warfare. Word of Jackson's courtship spread through the territory like autumn fire through dry grass. Eleanor felt the impact in subtle ways. Ranch hands, who'd been neutral, suddenly offering polite greetings, while others who'd been civil turned cold and silent. Women in town who'd previously ignored her now watched her with calculating eyes, assessing whether she was threat or curiosity. Jackson, true to his word, made his courtship as public as possible. He escorted her to meals, walked with her in the evenings, and spoke about her contributions to the ranch with such genuine pride that even skeptics had to acknowledge his sincerity. But the gossip continued. Eleanor heard fragments of it, enough to know that opinion remained divided. Some people admired her courage, others saw calculation in every gesture. The territorial newspaper even ran a brief notice about the Eastern woman who captured a rancher's heart through bookkeeping, which managed to be both complimentary and subtly insulting. Through it all, Eleanor focused on her work. She'd finished reorganizing the accounts and had moved on to helping Rosa modernize the household operations. She created systems for inventory management, renegotiated contracts with suppliers, and found ways to reduce waste without sacrificing quality. It was satisfying work, and it kept her hands busy when her mind wanted to spiral into anxiety about the approaching dance. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, gentle breeze. Temperatures that promised a comfortable evening. Eleanor, dressed in a gown she'd borrowed from Rosa and altered to fit a simple dress in deep green that brought out the color in her eyes. She'd never cared much about appearance, but tonight it felt like armor. Jackson arrived at her door precisely at 6, wearing a suit that made him look both unfamiliar and devastatingly handsome. His eyes widened when he saw her. "You're beautiful," he said simply. "You look terrified," she replied, echoing their earlier exchange. "I am, but I'm doing it anyway." He offered his arm, ready to face the wolves. "As ready as I'll ever be." The drive to town was quiet, both of them lost in their own thoughts. But when Jackson's hand found hers on the wagon seat, Eleanor felt some of her tension ease. They were doing this together. Whatever came next, she wouldn't face it alone. The dance was held in the town's largest building, a meeting hall that served as church, courthouse, and social center, depending on the day. By the time they arrived, it was already full of people. Eleanor felt every eye turn towards them as they entered, felt the whispers start like wind through leaves. Jackson's hand tightened on hers. "Ignore them," he murmured. "Focus on me." The music was provided by a small group of musicians, fiddle getter, and someone's enthusiastic but slightly off-key piano playing. Couples were already dancing, moving through the patterns with practiced ease. Jackson led Eleanor to the floor and pulled her into the first dance with confident grace. "I didn't know you could dance," she said, surprised by his skill. "My mother insisted, said a man should be able to move without looking like a startled elk." His smile was brief but genuine. "I hated the lessons. Right now, I'm grateful for them." They moved through the dance in silence for a while, and Eleanor let herself focus on the rhythm, the music, the solid presence of Jackson's hand on her waist. Around them, she could feel people watching, but it felt less hostile than she'd feared, more curious, assessing. When the song ended, Mrs. Patterson approached with her daughter in tow. "Mr. Steele, would you mind if Anne had the next dance? I'd like to speak with Miss Morrison." It was phrased as a request, but felt like a command. Jackson glanced at Eleanor, who nodded slightly. "Of course, Mrs. Patterson." As Jackson led Anne onto the floor, Mrs. Patterson guided Eleanor toward the refreshment table. "Punch," she offered. "Thank you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the dancers. Then Mrs. Patterson said, "You handled Sunday dinner well. Not many women would have spoken up the way you did." "I've never been good at staying quiet when accused." "I noticed. It's refreshing, honestly. Most women would have dissolved into tears or delicate protestations. Mrs. Patterson's smile was knowing. You've got steel in you. Jackson Steele is going to need that. Eleanor turned to face her directly. Mrs. Patterson, why are you telling me this? Because I think you're genuine. I think Jackson's regard for you is genuine. And I think you're about to face a gauntlet that will test whether that's enough. She paused. The women here are divided on you. Some think you're brave and admirable. Others think you're a calculating opportunist. Tonight is your chance to show them which you are. And how do I do that? By being exactly who you've been since arriving, honest, competent, unashamed. Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. My advice, don't try to charm them. Don't apologize for your success or your relationship. Just be yourself and let them decide whether they can handle it. Before Eleanor could respond, several other women approached, some friendly, some coolly assessing. For the next hour, she navigated a minefield of social interaction, answering questions about her work at Silver Creek, her background in Philadelphia, her intentions toward Jackson. Some questions were kind, others were barbed, designed to make her stumble. But Eleanor had survived worse than social judgment. She answered honestly, refused to be baited into defensiveness, and met every challenging gaze with level calm. Jackson rescued her, eventually pulling her back onto the dance floor with visible relief. How bad was it? He asked. Survivable, Eleanor said. Some of them are genuinely curious. Others are hoping I'll confirm their worst assumptions. And did you? I told them the truth, that I'm here because I wanted honest word, that I'm with you because I respect and care for you, and that I don't apologize for either choice. She paused. I may have been a bit sharp with Mrs. Thornton when she suggested I'd landed on my feet quite nicely for a desperate woman. Jackson's jaw tightened. What did you say? That desperation and ambition aren't the same thing, and perhaps if she'd ever had to work for survival, she'd understand the difference. A laugh escaped Jackson, surprised and genuine. You're magnificent, absolutely magnificent. They danced through several more songs, and gradually Eleanor felt the atmosphere shift. Not everyone warmed to her. She could still feel hostile gazes from certain corners of the room. But others seemed to relax, seemed willing to give her a chance. By the time the evening wound down, she'd received several genuine invitations to call on women in town, and at least 3 ranchers' wives had complimented her dress and her dancing. It wasn't victory, but it wasn't defeat either. On the drive home, Jackson said quietly, Thank you for tonight. I know it wasn't easy. Well, nothing worth doing is easy, Eleanor replied, but I'd rather face difficulty with you than safety alone. Jackson was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Eleanor, I need to tell you something. My father is stepping back from active ranch management. He wants to focus on the breeding program and let me take over operations completely. That's wonderful, you've earned it. It also means I'll be making decisions about the ranch's future, about who works here, what we prioritize, how we expand. He paused. I want you to be part of those decisions, not as hired help, as a partner. Eleanor's breath caught. Jackson, I'm not proposing, not yet. We've only been courting a week, and I won't rush something this important. But I want you to know where I'm heading. I want you to know that when I think about Silver Creek's future, I see you in it. Not just as my wife, but as someone whose judgment and skills shape what this place becomes. The words settled over Eleanor like a warm cloak. Partnership. Real partnership, not just romantic attachment, but shared vision and mutual respect. I'd like that, she said quietly. Very much. They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, and when they arrived back at Silver Creek, Jackson walked her to her door with careful propriety. He kissed her hand, brief, chaste, but full of promise. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Jackson. In her room, Eleanor sat by the window and looked out at the mountains. 2 months ago, she'd arrived here desperate and determined, with nothing but competence and courage to her name. Now she had work she loved, respect she'd earned, and the possibility of a partnership that honored both her strengths and her heart. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more gossip, more judgment, more tests of her character and Jackson's commitment. But for the first time since her mother's death, Eleanor felt like she was building something real. Something that belonged to her not through luck or charity, but through choice and effort. She'd chosen Wyoming. She'd chosen honesty over safety. She'd chosen Jackson Steele and the terrifying possibility of love. And whatever came next, she would face it the same way she'd faced everything else, with backbone truth and the stubborn belief that she deserved a life built on her own terms. The mountains stood guard outside her window, dark against the stars. Eleanor lay down, pulled the quilt to her chin, and slept peacefully. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight she had hope, partnership, and the first real sense of home she'd felt in years. It was enough. Epilogue. 5 years hence. The Wyoming sun set over Silver Creek Ranch, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Eleanor Steele stood on the porch of the main house, their 3-year-old daughter chasing chickens in the yard, while their infant son slept against her shoulder. The ranch had grown under their joint management, more land acquired, better breeding stock, a reputation for fair dealing and honest practice that drew workers from across the territory. Silver Creek had become known for something else too, as a place where competence mattered more than gender, where women could work in roles traditionally reserved for men if they had the skill for it. Eleanor's financial systems had been adopted by other ranches. Her training programs for women in ranching operations had expanded across 3 territories. She'd become, almost by accident, a voice for women's property rights in Wyoming. Jackson approached from the barn, his hair touched with the first hints of silver, his smile still capable of making her heart race. "Margaret Caldwell sent word," he said, settling beside her. "The territorial legislature is considering her proposal for women's property rights. She thinks it might actually pass." "Because enough people have seen it work," Eleanor said quietly. "Because we proved it possible." "You proved it possible. I just had the sense to recognize your worth." Eleanor leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. Their daughter shrieked with laughter as a chicken evaded her grasp. Their son stirred, making the small, contented noises of a baby waking. This was the life she'd built, not through rescue or luck or manipulation, but through competence, courage, and the radical choice to demand respect instead of accepting scraps. She'd arrived in Wyoming with nothing but determination and 17 cents. She'd faced down fraud, gossip, and social condemnation. And she'd won not by becoming what others wanted, but by insisting on being exactly who she was, capable, honest, unashamed. The sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and amber. Silver Creek settled into evening round them. Their ranch now, their responsibility, their future. It was a legacy worth leaving, a story worth telling. And it had started with one simple, radical act: a woman who refused to be owned, and a man who had the wisdom to offer her partnership instead. Together, they'd built something that would outlast them both, proof that respect freely given and honestly earned was the foundation on which real love could flourish. Thank you for joining Eleanor and Jackson's journey at Silver Creek Ranch. If you enjoyed this story of courage, partnership, and standing up for what's right, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more untold tales of the American West. Comment below and let us know what you thought of Eleanor's story. We read every single one. Until next time, may you find the courage to build a life on your own terms.